So, in order to understand how culture is influencing Islamic norms, we have to look at the role of custom in Islamic law. And it's very interesting. It's kind of an aside or a tangent, but it's a very interesting one, I think. The role of custom in Islamic law. The role of urf and ada. So urf means custom. Urf means what's known to be right. Ada also means custom or the way things are done. They're, for all intents and purposes, they're synonyms. But I'll use the word urf, which means custom. One of the five main maxims of Islamic law, one of the five al-qawa'id al-kulliyya, one of the five main maxims of Islamic law is al-ada muhakkima. Custom is dispositive. What does dispositive mean? It's a weird word. A dispositive means it disposes of things. It means all things being equal, this settles the issue. It obviously, it doesn't settle all issues, but all things being equal, custom is going to settle the issue. Custom is empowered in Islamic law. It is empowered. Why? Why is custom dispositive? The first is that the Quran, God sees human custom as having inherent value. This is very interesting. Why? God created you in shu'uban wa qaba'ila, peoples and tribes and nations, for what purpose? لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may come to know one another. Our differences, the differences in our custom, in our language and our color, are Quranically, these are signs of God. The differences in our languages, in our colors, in our nations, in our tribes, in our customs are signs of God. There is inherent value in these differences. It's like the beauty of color of fish in the sea. These are signs of God. The second, and this probably that leads. I don't know if it's because of this, but the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet empower custom. Right? For example, the Quran says for men, if you're going to divorce your wife, either imsakun bil ma'ruf or tasrihun bi ihsan. Right? Either you keep your woman according to what's ma'ruf, what's known to be correct, what's customary, or you send them away in a goodly way. Either you keep them and treat them correctly according to what's customary, or you divorce them in a goodly and beneficent way. Right? The Quran over and over talks about ma'ruf. The Sunnah of the Prophet over and over talks about ma'ruf. So here's direct commands for ma'ruf in the Quran. Divorce, spousal obligations. When Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, comes to the Prophet and asks him, she's like, listen, Abu Sufyan, he's not a very generous guy. He's not giving me enough money to buy stuff. What should I do? The Prophet says, go take from him his money what is ma'ruf, what's known right by custom. So for example, this is not accurate from my life, but let's say my wife could take money from my wallet. By the way, this is really interesting. Sharia is very class conscious. Not in a bad way. It's class conscious because class is real. If I married my wife, and let's say my wife was from a super rich family, and we get married, she's like, okay, when are we going to go to St. Bart's for Christmas vacation? What are you talking about? What is St. Bart's? She says, I want to take $100 from your wallet because that's what I used to get from my parents. This is not accurate for my wife, just to be clear. So that's very different. So if I'm from that same class, then that's okay. I understand that. But if I'm from a class where, you take $5 from your dad's wallet, or maybe nothing, this is actually a source of what are the two major sources for tension in marriage, according to experts? Money and, there's kids in the room, but you can say it. Yes, money and you know what? This is what I heard from experts. You remember Sherman Jackson, Dr. Jackson? He talked once to this. He was talking to this divorce lawyer, not for his own life, but just he was talking to someone professionally, and he said, what's been the best thing in your business? And she said, Hollywood. Hollywood expectations of marriage is like a huge cause of divorce. There's another interesting thing, cultural change. How people get their culture is affected by the pervasive influence of Hollywood. Okay, so things like spousal obligations. What are the obligations of a husband? What are the obligations of a wife? They are determined by custom. Does the guy help out doing the dishes or not? Some places in the world they don't. Some places they do. Right? Should the woman bring in money as well as take care of children? Some places this is expected culturally. Some places it's not expected culturally. There are no Quranic rules or Sunnah rules that say, you shall not work, you shall work or something. This is based on custom. It's commanded by the Prophet, by the Quran and the Sunnah to be taken from custom. Okay, so one way is direct empowerment of custom, because human culture has inherent value. The second reason that custom is dispositive is that human freedom has inherent value. This is very interesting. I know this sounds like one of these 1990s talks about how Islam and democracy are compatible, how Muslims invented ice cream or something like that. I'm not doing one of these things. Islam values freedom, okay? So we can make a poster about this. Islam values freedom. The al-asl, the default, the presumption in actions is permissibility. It's called al-ibaha al-asliya. Al-asl fil ashya' al-ibaha. There's two things where it's not true. In worship, can I worship God like this? Can I do my prayer like this instead of praying like this? No. In worship, it's prohibited unless you have evidence it's permitted. Also, sexual relationships. When is sex allowed? It's only allowed when it's permissible, when you have evidence permissible. Not, otherwise it's prohibited. So, except for worship and sexual relationships, the presumption with anything is that it's permissible until you have evidence it's prohibited. So, indulging custom is your obligation because custom is presumptively allowed. Everybody with me? Human conventions have inherent value. Human freedom has inherent value. And the third reason custom is dispositive is, as I said before, culture is an aircraft carrier. Pre-modern institutions do not have the capacity to affect massive cultural change over a short period of time. By the way, and I've been thinking about this over and over again, the modern world, modern media, the modern state really does have the capacity to affect change. And I was thinking about this. If I had my computer, I could show you this. Finally, I got pictures of something I've wanted to have for years. A dog meat restaurant. My Chinese TA got it from her dad. So in southern China, especially, dog meat has for centuries been a small but important part of the diet. And she showed me the dog meat restaurant with the different pieces of dog meat laid out, the different prices. Guess increasingly in places where dog meat was eaten, Korea, China, it's becoming either more very uncommon or even prohibited now. Why? What? Pet dogs? Who has pet dogs? Western people and the people who set trends in culture through film and music and all these other right? So by the way, I like dogs. Don't get me wrong. I can't eat dogs because it's haram. But what's the difference between a dog and another animal, right? They're all animals. So my point is, the reason we feel a certain way about dogs is culture, because of cultural tradition. Other places, you can see even within a period of a few decades, this kind of cultural change taking place. But pre-modern societies do not have the capacity to affect cultural change with that rapidity. By the way, even modern states have their limits. This is really interesting. And when I did my last sabbatical before the one I did first year law school at Georgetown. It's so interesting. Took a class on family law. Fascinating. And it's always funny because people, because I'm a like Muslim, quote unquote Muslim scholar, sometimes people think that I give them marriage advice. First thing I say is, I advise you, don't get in any fights with your wife. That's what I advise you. Do whatever she says, you'll be happy. But it's really interesting because people have these expectations of the way courts work. They think that, I'm going to go to the court. I'm going to tell them that my wife she's really mean and she yells at the kids. Like, you think the judge cares about this? They deal with all these insane people day in and day out. If they're going to sit there and you think they're going to care about someone's behavior? They care about basic violations of the law. They do not have the time and the capacity to shepherd people through marital discord. Even though, by the way, it's really interesting, if you look at the stated aims of family law courts in places like the United States, probably in Great Britain as well, they have these lofty ideals like best interests of the child. They'll always be trying to support the best interests of the child. But it's very, very hard. And imagine any state going in and trying to make sure that every single child's best interests are being advanced. They have to. They cannot avoid deferring to parents on these things. They have to basically farm this work out to parents. They do things like favoring alternative dispute resolution, favoring arbitration in divorce and family child custody cases, because they do not, even modern states with all their bureaucracy, with all their computers, with all their tax revenue, do not have the capacity to manage all of the family legal drama. It has to be, essentially, as much of it as possible has to be left to the couple or to the family to resolve. Okay. So we can look at the role of a custom in the Sharia, in God's law. You have custom that is directly commanded by the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet. We looked at 2 examples of that. Another major role is filling in the details where principles have been given by the Quran or the Hadith of the Prophet. You can think about it this way as the custom is like contouring the contact sources of Islamic law. Where the Sharia meets society, the way those pieces fit together is contoured by custom. So for example, in sales, so things like what is a condition that is understood? For example, when you go and let's say you go to a restaurant and you order, this happened to me the other day in London, people, the worst waffle I've ever had. And I'm not being picky, I'm not complaining, I'll eat a waffle. This was inedible. But of course, I'm so conflict averse. There's no way. That's my wife's job. I give it to her. She complains. But I just couldn't. But I'm telling you, here's the question. If I said this waffle, I can't eat it. What would the restaurant do? Would they say, well, tough toenails, man. You ordered a waffle, we gave you a waffle. What would they do? They would immediately, they would take it back and give me another waffle, right? Even though, maybe I ate half the waffle, they would still give me they would give me something else, or they give me a new waffle, right? That's just custom. But let's say I go, I go buy a car. I drive I don't like this car. It's not good enough. Probably not going to be that easy, right? So there's different, if you go into a supermarket, I don't know, maybe they would take back a half-eaten apple. I think they probably would. But you can imagine there's also different understandings about what type of thing you're buying, where, what's the value, the effect, the kind of what's customarily known about what's expected or not in terms of transactions. So these kind of things are legally binding. So if I go to a restaurant in the United States, this is interesting. I learned this in my class. Is this? I think civil law class. If I go into a restaurant and I order a hamburger, I eat the hamburger, and then I get the check. It's like $1,000. What the hell is this? And they say, you didn't look at the menu. This is the greatest hamburger on earth. It says right here, $1,000. I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't look at this. I just saw a burger. Actually, that's a valid defense because it's so uncustomary to have a hamburger for $1,000. So these are customs legally binding. When I go into a court, not me, God forbid, husband goes into court and starts complaining about the way his wife's acting. what is and is not acceptable behavior, both in an Islamic court and a, let's say, American court, this is determined by custom. These are legally binding rules. Hirs and theft. This is a really interesting example. So one of the things that in Islamic law, if you're going to have the had punishment for theft, which is essentially impossible to happen, if you're interested in reading about this, I wrote a great article, if I must say so myself, called Stoning and Hand Cutting in the Sharia. You can see it, find it online. It's a great article. One of the things, in order for someone to have the had punishment for theft to be carried out, is that they have to have taken something that is in what's called hirs. Hirs means a secure location. The reason I bring this up is just a really interesting case where even in the kind of most severe type of legal case you can imagine, custom is dispositive. What determines whether something's a secure location or not? Custom. So let's say you go into, this is interesting. I'm trying to think of an example. Let's take this room. This is actually real. I always wondered this. Like, is this like, if I put something in here, in this cabinet, can I expect it to be safe in this classroom? What do you think? You think so? Wow, Welsh people are very like good citizens. So definitely not where I live. But if I were to, for example, put something in my office, a locked office, in a drawer of my office or something, that would definitely be considered his. All right. But this is based on custom. So you have kind of you have a legal principle, like the hirs rule comes from hadith, but defining what that term is comes from custom. Then you have legal reasoning that's done kind of, you don't have any clear indication from the Quran, no clear indication from the Sunnah of the Prophet. It's Muslim scholars like operating out on more like abstract legal principles like preventing harm or something like that, or seeking justice. Things like movement in prayer. I think this is the Hanafi school too, right? So what breaks your prayer? If I'm praying and I do this, does that break my prayer?
Somebody from outside was to see you and they think that you're not in prayer.
So let's say I do this. What if I do this? Yeah. Okay. Hey, this is an interesting question. So any Maulanas who want to opine can. Okay, so I'm in prayer. I'm not doing it twice. I'm just showing you the movement. Does that break prayer?
The fatwa hasn't reached there yet. We're still trying to decide what smartphones are.
So I would say no. That's my opinion. What am I doing? I'm silencing my phone because it's ringing, right? So I'm silencing my phone. Now, 20 years before a smartphone, someone might say, what the heck's that guy doing? This is ridiculous. But when you have smartphones, everybody knows he has a smartphone. He's silencing his phone because they don't want to disturb the prayer. It's not a dramatic movement. So you can see custom is even things like in your worship, custom can influence them. And the last example is, this one I love, it's a fatwa from Imam al-Ghazali, damages in the bath. This is like the Turkish bath thing, not, bathtub at school. So you go into the bath, this guy comes and asks me, there's someone in the bath, and they've made a huge amount of lather. Like they took the soap and they're going like this, and they got it's like, Peter Sellers movie or something, just lather everywhere. It's going all over the floor. So someone comes in, Peter Sellers movie falls over, injures themselves. Who is liable for the damages? So the general rule is determined by custom. So if you have, whoever engaged in transgressive behavior is liable. If, Al-Ghazali says, if the guy in the bathtub is just, soaping up like everyone does, and there's a guy coming around squeegeeing, stuff like that, and this guy just happens to come in and slip, that's too bad. No one's liable. It's just unfortunate for him. But if this guy was making way more lather than was customarily usual, and it was going all over the floor, and he wasn't concerned about that, and the guy slipped on that, then the guy who was making all the lather is liable. It's based on custom. It's also really important to think about custom on kind of a spectrum of rulings. So there's certain, certain types of rulings that are based in like Quranic or Hadith, very clear statements and nusus that are not going to change with custom. So alcohol. I hear that Wales is the binge drinking capital of the UK. Anybody? Okay. I heard Cardiff is the binge drinking capital of Wales. And I heard that street that I was on is the binge drinking capital of Cardiff. It doesn't matter if you're a Muslim who lives in the binge drinking capital of the binge drinking capital of the binge drinking capital. Alcohol is not halal for you. Doesn't change. There's some things where the rulings change based on time and custom because of the role of custom in Sharia, and there's no clear indication. So, for example, what constitutes respectable clothing? I don't mean what constitutes your aura. Your aura is always the same. For a man, it's your navel to your knee, right? But, for example, could I come in to this lecture wearing nothing but like a bath towel around my waist that went from my navel to my knee? Could I give this lecture like that? My aura is covered, people. What are you complaining about? This is not respectable. This is not something that would give me muruwa. I wouldn't be considered an honorable person. This could detract from I wouldn't be accepted as a witness. Someone could say that you shouldn't marry this guy. I wouldn't advise, you employ him or something like that, right? So it has real impacts. And then there are things, there's like a middle tier between these two, between things where it's never going to change and where it does change, where it's like kind of it's an area of disputes because sometimes it's not clear whether the hadith or the Quranic verse is meant for all time or only when a certain situation's obtained. A good example of this is women's mosque access. Women's mosque access. So the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Bukhari where he says, La tamna'u amat Allah masajid Allah, right? Do not prevent the female servants of God from going to the mosque of God. Very clear, right? That is a very clear indication. Do not prevent women from going to the mosque. And Umar bin al-Khattab's wife, this is also in Sahih Bukhari, she's asked, do you go to the mosque? She says, yes. And Omar, my husband, would not dream of preventing me. But then, a few years later, also in Sahih Bukhari, Aisha is asked, the Prophet's wife is asked, she comments on this hadith. She says, if he were alive today, the Prophet were alive today, I don't think he would allow people to go because of how society has changed. So it's really interesting. In that one example, you can see that there's room to both say, no, women's mosque access is a right, it should not be prohibited. Look at what Omar's wife said. But you could also take Aisha's ruling and say, listen, she's saying that if society changes, if things get more dangerous, if it's unsafe, if people are disrespectful to women, then you should limit mosque access. And by the way, it's really interesting. So there's Shafi, all of Southeast Asia is pretty much Shafi school of law. So is the Malabar coast of India. I asked students of mine, some of them from Southeast Asia, some of them from the Malabar coast, I said, what are the differences between Shafiism, the Shafi school of law, in these two places? In Southeast Asia, women go into the mosque, walk into the mosque, look around, going to work, whatever, going in and out of the mosque. In places like Kerala, women don't go to the mosque. It's you can see the influence of, South Asian kind of Islamic norms on that, even though it's the same school of law. Like the Hanafis in South Asia, also with the Shafis, you don't really have mosque attendance by women. The last point I want to make is how do Muslim scholars deal with these challenges? What are their concerns as stewards? The first real factor is, as I said, the real limitations on pre-modern institutions to change culture. Pre-modern institutions, including state institutions to change culture. You have to choose your fights. Sometimes it's impossible to change things. And one of my friends, he actually is a Muslim who lives in the UK, Asad Naqvi, I'll give him a shout out. When we were in college, he said, sin is like a badly fit carpet. You push it down in one place, it's just going to pop up somewhere else, right? So at a certain point, you just say, we're going to push it down here, we're going to push it down there, it's going to pop over there, we can't do anything about it, right? The Sharia envisions this challenge and builds in the concept of private sphere versus the public sphere. And there's an amazing story about this. Omar bin al-Khattab is walking, during his caliphate, is walking down the streets of Medina, and he hears an absolute house party going on behind the walls of a house. He climbs over the walls of the house. He sees alcohol drinking. He sees carousing, womanizing, everything. And he's about to really like call in the police and break this party up and punish everybody. And the owner of the house says, what about the Prophet's command to obey, respect satr, covering people up, not to publicize sins? And what about the fact that the Quran says, if you go into people's houses, then go in through the door, right? Seek permission before you enter. You violated these three things. Omar says, you're right. Goes out, nothing happens. So there's an understanding that we have satr. We don't go and uncover people's private sins. I'm not talking about somebody who's beating their spouse and the spouse is suffering and you don't say anything about it. If someone's being harmed, that's a different issue. But if someone's just engaging in sinful behavior, I know some guy goes home every night and drinks himself silly at his house. I'm not going to publicize this because it's destructive to the Muslim community. It's destructive for everybody to know about all these sins going on. So, sins are going to happen. Doubts are going to happen. Infidelity or unfaithfulness to your religion is going to happen. But this should be done in the private sphere, not in the public sphere where it becomes destructive. Sometimes this can cause disagreement about when discomfort or misconduct is worth eradicating. So an example of this is Imam Suyuti, the famous Shafi'i scholar of Cairo who died in 1505, Imam Suyuti. He was very upset because there was a brothel that was open right next to the mosque in his neighborhood. And he gave fatwas, this brothel must be closed. Every time he gave the fatwa, senior scholars would say, no, don't do anything. It's not because the senior scholars like the brothel, it's just that this is going to cause people are going to commit sins. It's happening here. It's not going to stop. Us making a big deal about it is going to be more problematic. So sometimes it's impossible to change everything. Sin is like a badly fit carpet. The second major concern Muslim scholars had in this regard is they want to minimize friction, minimize dispute, minimize violence. There's a famous Andalusian scholar, Abu Sa'id al-Lubbi, Maliki scholar who died in 1381. And he mentions how it's praiseworthy for jurists to find means for legally justifying infractions that have become customary. I want to say this again. It is praiseworthy for jurists to find means of legally justifying infractions that have become customary. Think about the example of the Berber alwah. If you can keep these people within the fold of Islam, prevent them from having some weird thing where they bury fiqh books and say they're burying the Sharia, right? If you can do that by making the Sharia as wide as possible, as expansive as possible to bring them into that tent, you should do that. As Imam Shafi said, "Kuluma daq al-amr ittasa'a," right? Things, when situations get tight and constrained, the Sharia becomes expansive. The last case is the hardest. The last case is when you have both sides of a debate have compelling evidence. So, for example, the case of race and descent from slavery in Maliki marriage law in Northwest Africa. And I want to go back to the story of that this guy was a powerful chief of a tribe. I mean, he was a really rich and powerful man. And when he married this woman, his standing did not prevent her family from being mocked by people. And as I said, there are many Maliki scholars, the stars, the kind of the champions, the greatest names of the Maliki school of law, stuck with Malik's principle. Race, descent does not matter in marriage. Okay? But what became the majority position, especially in Northwest Africa, said custom is too strong. You have to respect custom. And in this case, like what what are you going to advise people? Are you going to advise people to engage in marriage where there's going to be major strife for their family? I'm not going to say what the right answer or wrong answer, because first I'm not qualified. Second of all, this is a conundrum. That's the point. This is a conundrum. It's easy to be principled. It's easy to say, I'm not racist and things like that. But what do you do when taking these stances has a real social cost? And it's interesting, also looking at issues of tribe in Arabia. Abdulaziz bin Baz, rahimahullah, the former mufti of Saudi Arabia, I think he died in 1999, if I'm not mistaken. He was from a non-tribal family, like a low-status family in Najd, not from one of the big tribes. So he was not sort of like he's not kind of defending the system. But he supported, in general, well, that's not true. He saw like kind of tribal chauvinism in Najdi society as un-Islamic. But he said, if you're not willing, if you're in a situation where it's going to cost you and your family too much to go through, like a marriage where you marry between tribes of different levels, or between someone who's not from a tribe and a tribe, he said, don't do it. You can do it if you want. It's allowed. This is not a kind of valid form of discrimination in the Sharia. But if the cost is going to be too high for you, don't do it. And the last case of caste in Islam, kind of in marriage in South Asia, Islamic law in South Asia, is if you look at the last 100 or so years, Muslim scholars in South Asia have been increasingly critical of caste. They've said this is un-Islamic. All these rules about caste are not, they have no basis in our religion, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, by the way, almost every Muslim scholar that I've come across in Hanafi law in South Asia supported the kind of discrimination, like kind of inter-caste discrimination amongst Muslims. They supported this based on Muslim rules of kafa'ah, suitability in marriage. The last 150 years have seen like a move against this for two reasons. One, kind of, for lack of a better word, Salafi impulse. People like to criticize Salafis, but one thing they don't put up with is local culture. In this case, I feel bad bagging stuff. They don't put up with local culture. In this case, they don't like caste. The second is kind of Islamist activism, Muslim solidarity against the British, kind of pan-Islamic solidarity, trying to mobilize society, including, by the way, Hindus as well, against like kind of colonial powers. These type of groups like the Jama'ah Islamiyah also are very anti-caste discrimination. So the last 100 or 150 years has seen a real push against what had long been the majority position about Hanafi marriage law and caste in Islam and South Asia. But I'll leave you with the quandary of Imam Yunus Junpuri, rahimahullah, where he said, you can have all the ideas you want. You can have all the ideals of love and piety, and I respect and love this person because their iman is so strong, and et cetera, et cetera. But I've seen these love marriages over and over again. If it's between castes, it's not going to work out. Right? These are real cultural differences. Cultural differences are what, this is when the rubber meets the road in a marriage, this is what causes disputes. So it's an example of the challenges of stewardship in Islamic civilization. Thanks very much.